from Pretoria. Is everything all right? People talk, say things.
Hello?
Why didn't you tell me it was out of order? I suppose you think that's funny.
I'm not allowed out the front door.
Who says you weren't?
Them.
Who?
Them.
It was terrible out there. I could hear breathing.
We told you.
Are you worried about the man?
They hate us. That's the truth. They want to kill and torture every one of us. You can see it in your eyes.
Come now, Frederick. Do you dream about unholy things?
I really don't like what's going on here. There's something wrong, and that's a fact.
Wait. What did you dream last night? This manifestation of evil. You must be delivered from evil.
Brown-haired albino was unbuttoning his coat, his eyes on Cermak, who was shaking hands with Roosevelt.
Well, it's wonderful to see you, Tony. A lovely gesture.
I just wanted to remind you and your administration that you have my full and enthusiastic support.
The albino assassin was reaching under his coat, but I grabbed his arm and pulled it away, and his hand came back empty, the gun still under his arm as his coat flapped. I buried a fist in his belly and doubled him over. And when he came up, the snout of my 9mm stared him in the face.
You got you this time, fucker.
Sounded like firecrackers, and the muzzle flash above the crowd looked like fireworks, but this was something else. Blurred figures in the crowd were falling, and a stubby, bushy-haired brown little man in a white shirt standing up on a bench was swarmed like a come-to-Jesus meeting got out of hand. Meanwhile, the ex-blonde was pulling away, and I swung at him, and he went down, unconscious, as the mass of people around us were heading to my right. I moved against the tide towards Cermak, pushing, shoving, and got to that touring car where Miller and Lang were crouched over the fallen Cermak, red spreading from his left side under his unbuttoned suit coat.
Where? Where are the goddamn bodyguards?
I had the blonde, Your Honor. He didn't fire the round. Some bushy-haired little creep.
This was no time to tell him he'd been shot by his son-in-law's gardener.
What the hell? They got me after all, Heller.
The crowd was turning into a mob. Miller, Lang, and I were hovering over Cermak in the quiet of the storm.
Heller, get your people out of the way. We need to move the president and his vehicle out of here. For Christ's sakes, Cermak's been shot. Take him with you. Get him to a hospital.
Roosevelt, sitting in back, heard me.
Put Tony in here and get us the hell out.
The shooter's big revolver was clicking on an empty chamber now. But that must have had an 8-round rod, as I found myself on a battlefield where bleeding audience members wandered like wounded warriors, helped by their dazed loved ones.
Although edited for television, tonight's thriller contains scenes of suspense and violence which may be unsuitable for young viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it's I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and the perhaps never-to-be-defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, moi. I'm right here for you. I'm Robert Meyer Burnett, and I'm Rob-casting it. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community, coming at you from the Robservatory. I can't even say it, the Robservatory. You know, everything's cute and clever around here. People throw nicknames at me. I just put up artwork. Unfortunately, those pieces of artwork, 2 of the men who designed them are no longer with us, which is why I will always use them in their memories. Anyway, I don't want to get you all down. Don't want to get you down. There's enough to get you down. I'm here to bring laughter and mirth and fun-filled antics to your life. Shenanigans, hijinks will always ensue on this show, I promise. As a matter of fact, when you open up the floodgates, you get some letters. And I got 2 letters from the same guy, fan letters, not really necessarily a fan of me, but letters from a fan. And they are interesting because I think they have a lot to say about fandom in general. But I'm gonna read this first one because I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting in terms of what it says about tonight's topic and also what it says about fandom. So this letter comes to us from Nicholas Batoni. And he starts out and he says, if God is all powerful, he cannot be all good. And if he's all good, he cannot be all powerful. Wise words written by Chris Terrio and Zack Snyder. Let me stop you right there, Nicholas. If you come at the king, you better not miss. That's all I'm saying. Those words were not written by Chris Terrio and Zack Snyder. They were repurposed. That is a sentiment. I'll tell you what that is. And that is referring to Epicurus, an ancient Greek philosopher. And it's known as the Epicurus paradox. And so in the face of evil and suffering, it's most famously attributed to Epicurus, a Greek philosopher. And while the exact wording may vary in different paraphrases, the core of his argument, often referred to as the Epicurean paradox or the problem of evil, is captured in this type of dilemma. If God is willing to prevent evil but not able, then he is not omnipotent. If he is able but not willing, then he is malevolent and not all good. If he is both able and willing, then whence comes evil? And this argument has been used throughout history. It's a philosophical and theological discussion point, and it has been for 2,000 years. Now, here's my problem with modern fandom, and I don't like putting down fans. This is not what I'm doing. But what I'm saying is, we fans should be the most educated and the most well-versed in the subjects of fandom. And a quick Google search, like if you ever want to know anything, Google's your friend. And you can punch in any quote you want and find out its attributions, where it comes from. And when you start off a letter like this, even I knew that this was, in fact, the Epicurean paradox, because it's been utilized in so many ways throughout history. And for you to send me a letter and have it say, wise words written by Chris Terrio and Zack Snyder, does not start off on the best foot. Now, I'm a friend, but if you were writing this to somebody in a professional capacity, your opening line would have, well, it would have proverbial egg on its face. And let me continue with this letter. Well, Rob, you came to YouTube slobbering over Kevin Feige, and given time, Mr. Feige has shown his true colors. It's funny how, now that Feige doesn't have his butt buddy Jeff Johns around to steal screenplay and story ideas from Zack Snyder's DC films, Feige can't seem to string together a cinematic universe any longer. In the words of Malcolm X, the chickens have come home to roost. With all the underhanded things Feige did to help derail the DC EU, and now Feige's going through the same thing. It's been 5 years post-Endgame, and nothing has hit for the MCU, and you have to wonder why. Well, with the exception of Deadpool and Wolverine, which is $1.5 billion, and, of course, Spider-Man No Way Home, which is, of course, $2 billion. You could argue that No Way Home is actually a Sony film, and you wouldn't be wrong. But anyway, now, since Gunn's Superman has failed to make more money than Man of Steel is it supposed to, and it's still earning. It's got another month in theaters, at least. Their hope is an MCU-DCU crossover, which was probably the plan from the get-go. Well, you know more than me in the trades, because that hasn't been reported. So both franchises can try and make some kind of cash flow. The fall of the MCU is going to be fun to watch. Like I'm sure Kevin Feige was laughing at the fall of the Snyderverse and the DC EU. Actually, no, he wasn't. Because when one superhero movie fails, it hurts the entire genre. Anyway, with no competition and Superman 2025 being nothing more than an MCU film, Feige has shown that Marvel Studios will probably go the way of Carolco Pictures. No. It was a great run, but cheaters always get caught in the end. Well, first of all, Nicholas, I want to thank you for sending me this letter. But it's very interesting. You know, one of the things that I've learned, and I've been a fan my whole life, but the first day I spent on a movie set, which was, of course, in the summer of 1989 on the set of Leatherface, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, where I first met Mike DeLuca, who's now in charge of Warner Brothers along with Pam Abdi. He was a young executive on that film, and I met him during night shoots. When one of my heroes, Ken Foray, star of Dawn of the Dead, was in a body pit. Of course, they had to, where he got his full face chainsawed off. They had to cut that out of the film. But anyway, one of the first things that I learned the first day I worked on an actual movie set is everything that I knew about movies, that I thought I knew about movies, everything I learned in film school, all of that information as a fan and as a student, I knew fuck all about what it was like to produce movies on a day-to-day basis. I learned more in that summer about making movies on every level than I could have possibly imagined. And I realized that, look, this was at the time, a $3 million movie. New Line was looking for a franchise replacement to their highly successful Nightmare on Elm Street films. As a matter of fact, my first few days on the job, I was going to the set of Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child, and picking up whatever I could that we might be able to reuse. I had creative freedom. I could take whatever I wanted off the set. They were filming the last bit of motorcycle effects, which was very cool, watching physical effects. I mean, let me tell you, I was in Shangri-La, kids. It was fantastic. But I learned an incredible amount as a PA. I was the art department production assistant. So I was actually working, when you're working for all the different departments. I was working for props, I was working for effects, I was working for the art department, and we actually built sets. So we weren't on a stage. None of that movie was shot on a stage. It was all shot on sets that were either out in Palmdale, there was a gas station set, and then the farmhouse set that we actually built behind the hills of Magic Mountain. And I participated in all of it in my own small way. There was only one of me, and it was amazing. But I learned what I didn't know, and it was it could fill books, what I learned that summer. And it also completely changed my perspective as a fan, because I was given a perspective on what it was like, the creative difficulties. And that movie was very interesting because what was really interesting about that was, here's New Line trying to replace the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise with something they thought would be equally as viable. So they decide to resurrect Leatherface. The great Jeff Burr, rest in peace, was directing. He was so nice to me, my first Hollywood director, and so was screenwriter Dave Scow. We just celebrated his 70th birthday. But even I knew that was a mistake. And New Line had a hell of a time dealing with the ratings board. The film was rated X like 5 times, and when it finally was released, and I think it came out in 1990, it was heavily edited. And because the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise has a fantasy, of a full-on comedic fantasy bent that would undercut the horror of kids being slaughtered. Whereas Texas Chainsaw, they weren't going to make Texas Chainsaw 2. They wanted to revive the original, or go for that intensity, which still to this day is one of the most visceral and deeply disturbing horror films ever made. And you can't build a franchise around that. I mean, you know, when the female audience is becoming the biggest horror audience, or at the time they hadn't become that yet, but you know, 14-year-old girls ain't gonna dig Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's just not something that they're gonna gravitate toward, because ultimately it's ugly it comes from a deeply disturbing place. There's no fantasy context where that's enjoyable. I mean, you know, I can enjoy my torture porn and my martyrs and my frontiers and my high tension and the French extreme works, but it doesn't fly on a grand scale, because the fun in it is dark, dark, dark indeed. But I learned a lot. and I learned I didn't know what I didn't know. And the thing about what you're writing in here is, look, I understand all the people that love Zack Snyder's movies, and that's why I picked the article that I'm going to read tonight. But as fans, we should always be on a quest for knowledge. We should never think, especially we act like we know what's going on in people's personal lives. We act like we know what's going on inside the boardrooms of studios. We do not. And frequently, we're discussing box office, and we all think we're in the know, and look, I'm guilty of that as well, but we're not. And there's got to be a time when everybody stops and says, okay, I really don't totally understand this. And rather than get all angry about it and pretend that we do, we have to stop and realize that as fans, there's a limit to our knowledge. There's a limit. And to pretend, to write things to me, too, that you want me to read on the show, where you say things like, Kevin Feige doesn't have his butt buddy Jeff Johns around to steal screenplay and story ideas from. Look, let me tell you, nobody has to steal screenplay and story ideas, Kevin Feige least of all. And whether you like the direction of the Marvel Cinematic Universe now, it is, bar none, the single most successful franchise in Hollywood history. It's made more money by a wide margin. And if you average out all the films, it used to be that the Infinity Saga films averaged out, the 23 movies of the Infinity Saga average out to $1 billion a film if you took their total earnings and divided them by 23. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is certainly not the powerhouse that it is or was in the past. I don't know what the future has in store for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think that the fact that Disney Plus, their streaming series, came out expecting Star Wars and Marvel to carry them without actually consulting the people at Marvel or Lucasfilm to say, okay, let's talk about this. How can we work together rather than just demand, hey, you're already making some of the most expensive movies ever made that are also the most successful. So, hey, we just expect you to start making TV shows. Well, that was a bad strategy. That was a Bob Chapek strategy. It was never going to work. It didn't work. Creatively, it has never paid off. And I would dare say it derailed Marvel to the point where they're now just climbing back and getting back to where they should be. And the fact is, both Fantastic Four and Thunderbolts are steps in the right direction. And then following that up with Spider-Man Brand New Day, and of course Avengers Doomsday, which I think is a film built on a gimmick. But I hope it works out well. I think Thunderbolts, Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, we'll see. I don't know. I don't have a dog in this hunt. People think I shill for these things. Look, my position is I want every science fiction, fantasy, or horror film to do well. It really bothered me when Companion came out in January. I thought Companion was a really great movie. It came out from New Line, executive produced by Roy Lee. You had a part of somebody adjacent to Zach Kreger's friendship circle making their first feature. Terrific movie, really well executed. I saw it with a huge crowd of 5 people. And I sat in the theater, and I'm like, this is a wildly entertaining movie. This movie deserved to make $50 million, and it didn't. It didn't. I thought it wasn't well marketed, and it was a terrific film. And I look at that, and those are the kind of movies I want to see. I want to see whether they're Ryan Coogler's Sinners. I watched it again last night. I have the 4K Steelbook right here. And I was just flipping through channels, and it's on HBO Max, and for whatever reason, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to watch the opening. I want to see just some of those opening shots of the cotton fields because they're great. And I ended up watching the whole goddamn movie again. We're in a golden age right now of getting some great horror in the theaters. But I think that it's weird that we're mad at people that we don't even know. The only people you should really be mad at are people that make Star Trek. That's the exception. But I have a reason for that. It's been a lifelong avocation, and I've studied the franchise my entire life, and I've worked professionally for the franchise owners, creating new programming for them. And so I have a reason to be angry. But anyway, I just don't think that writing letters like this. I read your letter. I'm only going to read one of your letters. The other one, first of all, you brought up a bunch of things. I didn't get on YouTube, or I didn't know John Campy or John Schnepp I knew John Schnepp before I was on YouTube with him, but I didn't get onto YouTube until 2015. I had nothing to do with anything that happened with Man of Steel, when it came out. So I don't know anything. I can't speak to that. And a lot of your letter dealt with those times in YouTube, so those are out of my wheelhouse. But anyway. And by the way, if you're going to throw a quote at me that's from a movie and you say somebody wrote it, just always put a quote into Google. Just make it a point. If you find a quote and it's attributed to somebody, just as a point of order, always put that quote into Google and just go, who said blah, 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 or who wrote blah, blah, blah. Just take you a few seconds and it won't leave you with egg on your face. So, yeah. And, you should really look up the Epicurean paradox. It's really interesting. It's a great quote, and I'm glad they use it in the movie because it was appropriate. But anyway, I have many more letters I'm going to read after this very long article. Now, as always, the article I have linked in the description. It comes from a man whose articles I really like. He is a Hollywood. He's made TV shows. He's produced things, and he also wrote a book I really loved called Psalms for the End of the World. His name is Cole Haddon, and I've read a number of his articles on the show. He published this article once again on Medium today, and I was looking for something to talk about. I wanted to talk about weapons, but I haven't seen it yet. By the way, 315, Mountain Grove 16, Harkins Theater, CineX. If any of you are around, come say hello. Let's meet in the bar early. Let's have a few drinks first and go in and see what Zach Kreger has cooked up for us, because this is easily one of my most eagerly anticipated movies of the year. Am I a paid shill for Zach Kreger? No. Has Warner Brothers paid me to say that? No. I'm a lifelong fan who's excited to see an auteurist horror film, written and directed by Zach Kreger, coming off of the triumph that is, I thought, Barbarian. By the way, where the fuck Disney, Fox, where's the Blu-ray? I mean the 4K. Why is that? License it to Second Sight, would you? Why are you holding it close to the vest? How frustrated do you think he is? I even know that there was an audio commentary recorded for Barbarian. Let's get that shit out, son. Or Bros, or whoever owns it. Walt, come on, Fox. Or it's not Fox anymore. 20th Century, let's get Barbarian out in 4K, preferably with a boutique label. I would say Second Sight. Make it happen, okay? Make it happen. But I can't wait. I'm excited as a fan. Auteurist vision, weapons, people. Yeah. But anyway, so Cole Haddon wrote this article. I found it today. I'm like, oh, I gotta read me some of this, because This is the stuff right here. Again, this comes from Cole Haddon. It was published on Medium 8 hours ago. Superman could turn out to be the most important film of the year. James Gunn's take on the Man of Steel has a lot to say about who we've become as a society and what might come next, and it all hinges on a single scene nobody is talking about. Oh, I assure you, Cole, some people are, but let's get into it. Near the end of this second act of the new Superman, our titular hero come Clark Kent returns to his childhood home in Kansas to be cared for by the only parents he's ever known, Ma and Pa Kent. He's been badly injured by kryptonite exposure and needs someplace to recover. The next morning, Pa Kent finds Clark on the front porch and drops down beside his boy to give him the talk. You know what I'm talking about here. The speech that gets the protagonist back in the fight after their low point in Hollywood films. Wrapped up in this deeply moving scene are truths about parenting and freedom, but also a coded message from writer-director James Gunn about the character of Superman, where we are as a society today and where we're going, and even the nature of art itself. It's one of the most brilliant and deft moments in cinema I've seen all year, tying together an already thematically rich film with a single line of dialogue. And yet I've seen nary a mention of it in the discourse about the film. What you're about to read, or what I'm about to read to you, is Cole Haddon's article about art, our culture, and the state of like everything in 2025. It's also an article about the new Superman film, which has only just hit movie theaters. While it will make sense to you whether you've seen it or not, if you haven't and intend to, know that elements of it will be ruined for you if you don't turn back now. In short, you've been warned. There be spoilers ahead, kiddos. The brief, controversial life of the DC Extended Universe. Before I dig into the message James Gunn coded into Superman, let's start with a history lesson about how we got here first. It will help us understand an important aspect of the cultural landscape in which Gunn would have to start work on his film. In 2013, Zack Snyder directed Man of Steel, launching what was expected to be the DC Comics answer to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'm not going to pretend like there aren't many things to admire about the film, but in general, it did not feel like the Superman I and millions of other people in the audience grew up with. It was desaturated, cynical, violent in a way that made it difficult to watch with children like my son, and ultimately reduced Superman to a brutal executioner. This isn't criticism, despite how it might read. It just means Man of Steel wasn't made for me. And that's okay. A lot of art isn't made for me. From my perspective, I've always loved Man of Steel. I loved it as a science fiction first contact film, not so much as a Superman movie, but I loved it. My own issues with the film aside, many other people in the audience enjoyed Snyder's take a lot. Before long, the disagreement between fans and non-fans was playing out across social media in all the ways that have made us all dread checking our social media accounts. Things did not improve with Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, which somehow took both Superman and Batman to new lows for one segment of fans. Box office continued to underwhelm as a result. The next year, Wonder Woman debuted, the only early DC Extended Universe film to truly deliver when it came to both ticket sales and critical success, which, given its saturated fun, felt like a stark rebuke of what had preceded it between the Snyder films and Suicide Squad in 2016. Shit really hit the proverbial fan when Justice League opened later in 2017 and quickly crashed and burned. After a personal tragedy, Snyder had been replaced in the middle of production by Warner Brothers in what I think we can now call a deeply uninspired move. The studio had recruited Joss Whedon, the guy who co-wrote and directed the incredibly successful Marvel team-up The Avengers, to come in and save its own team-up film and DC brand, according to many. The Frankenstein outcome of this mashup of styles and tonal instincts was a nightmare to behold for everyone who bought a ticket. Fun fact, a week before Justice League was released, a friend of mine brought Whedon to a party I threw, not me, but Cole Haddon, the writer, I threw as a sort of gift, as they knew what a fan I was of his work. When I congratulated Whedon on the film's imminent release, even going so far as to lie and tell him I was looking forward to it, his face told me he most definitely was not. The man knew what a train wreck was heading his and the public's way. After Justice League's release, Warner Brothers, which owns DC Comics, kept trying to right the ship, as I would often hear it described by people involved. Right the ship. Right the ship. There was always a new assurance of, they're changing things up. They've learned their lesson. But there was no recovering from how desperate the frantic rush to compete with the MCU looked, or the appalling treatment of Snyder that had become a complete and utter nightmare across social media. While I was not an admirer of his take on the DC Universe's characters, Zack Snyder is a serious artist. He was hired to do a job, and it was revolting to use the suicide of his daughter to fuck with his vision. Of course, fans of that vision were pissed. I was pissed. This is how we wound up with the Zack Snyder's Justice League from 2021, a 4-hour-long cut of the film that somehow still didn't satisfy his online supporters. No, they wanted Warner Brothers to hire the guy back to reshoot everything that had followed, as if that wasn't a delusional demand up there with fan petitions for Kathleen Kennedy to greenlight a new Star Wars sequel trilogy that pretends away the previous one. It's difficult not to imagine all these films, or all these fans, these trolls, these angry, whatever you want to call them, are nothing more than a room full of lobotomized chimpanzees being cybernetically coerced into spewing hate online in an effort to warp how we understand reality. Which brings me back to Gunn's Superman, a film that actually includes that room of chimp bots I just described. It's the first installment in a rebooted DC cinematic universe that hopes to succeed where Snyder's version face-planted with spectacular aplomb. How would the filmmaker contend with a legion of fans as vociferously divided over what Superman means to them, as Americans have become about the United States' ideals and varied democracy? A new take on the alien greeting, I come in peace. Okay, let's talk about Superman 2025 now. The film, which was released on July 11th, features a twist on Superman's origin story that, while explored in other mediums in the past, is wholly new on the big screen. For those who grew up with either the 1978 Richard Donner's Superman, the movie, or Zack Snyder's adaptation, it will no doubt come as something of a shock. Jor-El and Lara Lorvan, the birth parents of Kal-El, the last son of Krypton, the child who will grow up as Clark Kent and ultimately become Earth's mightiest hero, are, brace yourselves, total dicks in Gunn's flick. Clark still learns of his heritage in the traditional way this time around, meaning he encounters a recorded message from his birth parents imploring him to do good, but we learn the recording was damaged during the crash landing on Earth, preventing Clark from listening to the whole message. And based on what he did here, though, he was inspired to become Superman. Well, Lex Luthor breaks into the Fortress of Solitude, and with the help of his cyborg henchwoman, gains access to all of it, and wow. As I said, Jor-El and Lara are just the worst. It turns out they did, I said, getting jiggy with it. I don't care if that dates me. I just watched a Superman film starring an actor born the same year I graduated high school, so I'm a little bitter right now, I'm sorry. James Gunn knows a cool word all artists should, too. Ambiguity. I don't know why they keep doing that. Is a noun. Ambiguity, the quality of being open to more than one interpretation. Inexactness. I hate ambiguity. Why won't James Gunn just tell me what to think? The idea that the L's have a strange definition of be a light for humanity is an explicit example of ambiguity in James Gunn's Superman, which sets it apart from the many other less obvious ambiguities the filmmaker chose to liberally sprinkle throughout his film. There are three that I want you to consider, because they demonstrate how Gunn makes it impossible for you to remain passive in Superman's narrative, which is the point, as I'll eventually show. Don't worry, this is all relevant to that coded message. But it also shows how I, after nearly 20 years as a professional screenwriter, try and interrogate films to decipher their deeper meanings. Perhaps it will help you as a storyteller, regardless of the medium you create in. Is Superman an allegory for the United States? Early in the film, Lois Lane, Rachel Brosnahan, conducts her first official interview with Clark Kent Superman about recent actions he's taken that he's come under a lot of fire about. The placement of this scene is key to its role in the bigger story. That's because Superman follows a traditional Hollywood structure, which makes this the theme-stated part of the narrative. This might sound overly technical, but it's just the way these things have come to work, whether we like it or not, and so the point of the scene is more heavily weighted than others around it. For those who know what to look for, Gunn is waving a sign at audiences that says, "This is what this film is about. Pay attention, you knuckle-draggers." Of course, Gunn isn't so crude or rude. He hides his theme in what begins as a fun teet-to-teet interview between Clark and Lois, but which quickly devolves into an argument about the central conflict of their relationship, which is, he only sees good in the world, while she is accustomed to, reality. So, what is the theme of Superman, as we're meant to understand it less than 15 minutes into the film? Simply put, does a hero who stands for truth, justice, and the American way still matter in 2025? I know the old Superman slogan has changed to a better tomorrow rather than the American way, but there's no way around the fact that Lois questions Clark the way she would an American president, acting as a maverick world cop, that Gunn himself has repeatedly stated that Superman is intended to reflect the state of American society today, including a fear of immigrants like Superman, and Superman's origin story in this film, his foundational myth, so to say, is as morally flawed as America's when you get past the feel-good propaganda. Clark's responses to Lois's questions don't discourage my interpretation here either. He's smug, self-righteous, and even surely like an American tourist when confronted abroad by people who don't see the world like them. When she challenges him about invading a country without regard for international law, he counters that everyone knows the country is corrupt without evidence. Strong Iraq War vibes here. Lois says he can't prove that, but Clark insists he just knows, because he alone gets to define what's right and wrong. The United States has long been accused of being a rogue international player, consistently going it alone, a country that celebrates maverick behavior like Superman's more than international cooperation. It is the world's cop, as has often been pointed out. A beacon of democracy, we were also told, hence why you could trust us whenever we felt like dropping missiles in your backyard 5,000 miles away from our own borders. But how do these myths hold up in 2025? Because they are myths, of course, as much as Superman is within American culture. Ideas and ideals we aspire to, or at least we once did once upon a time. Superman and the Stars and Stripes used to be synonymous, don't forget. Thus, another way to state Superman's theme is, does Superman and America still matter in 2025? All this said, I suggest the most important aspect of this scene is how Lois picks apart Clark's own interpretation of his unilateral actions, revealing there are many ways to look at a meta-human intervening in global politics. Clark counters that he's trying to do good, that's all that matters, which Lois scoffs at, because even the definition of good itself is open to interpretation in 2025 too. Here, Gunn is warning the viewer that he isn't going to be providing clear answers on a lot of subjects in Superman. You will be an active participant in this story, so pay attention. The angry rich right guy who wants you to love and worship him. Another example of Gunn's use of ambiguity in Superman is his holographic take on Lex Luthor. Here, Luthor is a tech bro in the vein of the widely idolized Elon Musk. I mean, if that's what you see in his character performance, but you could just as easily swap in Mark Zuckerberg, Peter Thiel, or Sam Altman. You might also see Donald Trump, the leader of what many, including me, would call a cult, cutting a deal with foreign powers to make himself a king. Or what about Vladimir Putin? You know, the dictator utilizing an army of bots, maybe not chimp bots, but bots all the same, to create geopolitically advantageous cultural discord. Luthor shifts constantly between the worst of what we've allowed the powerful to become in the 21st century, even the online misogytroll who fantasizes about locking up hot women for not appreciating them enough. He really does that, by the way. He locks up his girlfriends. It's worth noting that Holt originally auditioned for the part of Superman before obviously not getting the part. What a stroke of meta genius to cast him in the role of a white, red-blooded American man who resents being second best to any foreigner. To be clear, when discussing ambiguity with regard to Luthor, there's no way to believe audiences are possibly meant for the guy. He's clearly Superman's villain, and Gunn makes almost no effort to elevate him to that too often granted title of anti-hero. No, here audiences are being asked to decide if the qualities Luthor demonstrates are repugnant, and if so, why don't they find them repugnant in any of those billionaires and dictators I listed off a moment ago? In other words, in Superman, why do we accept Luthor is a bad guy, but in real life we admire and follow those who behave exactly like him? The last example of ambiguity in Superman I want to share regards a key part of Lex Luthor's evil plan involving conflict between two foreign nations. One of these is in the former Soviet Union, or maybe a Russian satellite named Bavaria. Bavaria, by the way, appeared in the second issue of the Superman comic, literally Superman issue number 2. The other is a Middle Eastern country of some variety named Jaranpur. Bavaria is occupied by white people, Jaranpur brown people. Oh, and the former is determined to invade, conquer, and wipe out the latter for some offense that immediately seems less severe than the massacre of the brown people Superman had to thwart. Many in the audience seem to have very quickly decided the white country was intended as an allegory for Israel and the brown country is one for Palestine. But is it? Here's some people that had some things to say. Crystal Ball on the Twitters says, feels like a major cultural moment that Israel is quite clearly the bad guy villain country in the big budget Hollywood movie Superman. Going in, I thought it would be subtle, but it was not subtle. My mind is kind of blown. Remy Kanazi says, even Superman hates Israel. And then here's another one. Honestly, I thought y'all were exaggerating, calling Superman an anti-Israel, but oh. So there you go. The association seems far-fetched at first, as Gunn turned in a draft of the script in May of 2023. 4 months before October 7th, 2023, when Hamas horrifically attacked Israel. That attack led to 21 months of almost entirely one-sided warfare that has seen tens of thousands of Palestinians killed by the IDF, perhaps hundreds of thousands, in what the Israeli government claims is an attempt to recover hostages and permanently break Hamas's back, but which more and more people around the globe are calling a genocidal campaign. However, despite the incongruous timeline I just presented, Gunn clearly had plenty of opportunity to work the war into his film, as his rewrites continued long after May of 2023, as is the case with all Hollywood films right through production. In December of that year, 3 months after the horrors of October 7th, he even shared he was 99.999% finished with the Superman script, making it clear he was still working on it. Counterpoint to my counterpoint. Gunn recently told the Times of London, quote, when I wrote this, the Middle Eastern conflict wasn't happening, so I tried to do little things to move it away from that, but it doesn't have anything to do with the Middle East. It's an invasion by a much more powerful country run by a despot into a country that's problematic in terms of its political history, but has totally no defense against the other country. It really is fictional. Counterpoint to my... Wait, where am I? Sorry, I got lost there for a moment. I'd like us to also consider what Luthor's ultimate goal is in Superman, besides killing Superman. In engineering this foreign Bavaria-Jaranpur war, he expects the Bavarian leader to gift him the conquered brown country to rule over as a king. This is fascinating because it sounds a lot like, hell, it sounds exactly like, Donald Trump's February 2025 suggestion that, post-war, he would be turning the Gaza Strip into the Riviera of the Middle East, with a golden statue of himself at the center of it. So, did Gunn intentionally fill Superman with all of these parallels to real-world events that have taken place since he finished his first draft of the script? Or has the 21st century become so comically cruel and absurd that any attempt to depict fascist behavior will quickly mirror something that's actually happening in the real world? The reality is, it doesn't matter. What does matter is how you interpret this plot point based on who you are, regardless of how or why it originated. Because ambiguity makes you an active participant in art, just to keep driving this point home. James Gunn's take on Pa Kent feels deeply Red State in a kind, not critical way. The character is played by Pruitt Taylor Vance, who is a man of considerable mass. Here he appears unhealthy, lumbering as if he should be dragging an oxygen tank behind him, living in an aesthetically ugly ranch house that most people wouldn't want to own. He's clearly worked his ass off in life and tried to be a good person while doing it, but it's come with few rewards. By contrast, his beloved boy Clark is the physical opposite of his adoptive father in every way. More, he has the physical strength to be more than just a good person, which is why when Pa Kent wraps up the talk, he tells his son he couldn't possibly be prouder of him. Cue tears. But I don't want to talk about how lovely or moving this scene is. And it is lovely and moving, written with economical beauty by Gunn. I want to talk about what happens when Clark tells his father that his birth parents didn't send him to Earth to help humanity as he understood from the partial message he received. The reason he became Superman to begin with. No, Jor-El and Lara Lorvan sent Clark here to conquer us. If you hadn't noticed, this is why this specific ambiguity is explicitly stated in the film, unlike the others Gunn keeps subterranean for us to work out and interrogate as far as I'm trying to do here. In the film, Clark must directly confront his misunderstanding of his birth parents' message and his secret origin. He's the active participant in this case, not the audience, as with all the others. Forgive me, I don't have Pa Kent's precise verbiage to share with you because I didn't take notes while watching Superman. I was too busy, enjoying it. But I can generally tell you what he says in response to Clark's existential despair over his origin story being blown up. What you understood that message to mean says more about you than what they wanted for you, Clark. Again, I'm mangling the actual dialogue, which was elegant, unlike mine. The key detail here is that Pa Kent says what matters is how Clark interpreted the message, not what his birth parents actually meant. And now at last, we come to Gunn's coded message to his audience. He's not even being subtle about it at this point, and yet it's been overlooked by the majority of audiences and critics from what I see, because it's Trojan horsed into such a beautiful father and son scene. Did you miss it too? It's the key to truly understanding Superman. At the start of Superman, Lois Lane's interview with Clark Kent stated the film's theme as, "Does Superman and America still matter in 2025?" But here at the low point, through Pa Kent's words, James Gunn asks us to reframe the question and his entire film as, do you even want them to matter in 2025? Obviously, the filmmaker has his opinions, but as we're about to discuss, he needs you to answer this critical question yourself, even if that means risking losing chunks of his audience. You might even say, Superman is a litmus test about what we've become as a society and where we're going next. That's why I won't be shocked if we come to consider it the most important film released by Hollywood this year, and maybe even this decade. Such is the potential magnitudinal power of a truly political take on Superman like this one. Your choices, your actions, that's what makes you who you are. If you can, imagine the recording of Clark Kent's biological parents as a film or any other piece of art. There was the intent of the filmmakers, his parents, and there was the unexpected meaning that was introduced by the subjective experience of its audience, such as the widely popular conclusion of the Bavaria-Jarinpur War is an allegory for Israel and Palestine, despite evidence to the contrary. As I often say here at 5 a.m. Story Talk, the audience is part of your story, as is the history that they're living through, whether you want them to be or not. You certainly don't have to think about them when you're writing, as James Gunn has, in my opinion, but they'll bring their own baggage to said story all the same. Clark, for metatextual example, brought his baggage with him into the movie theater of his own life, baggage filled with oodles of goodness and decency, and that helped him interpret the artwork in question, his parents' ambiguous message. It's my belief, with considerable evidence to back me up, I think, that James Gunn set out to construct a story almost entirely out of explicit and implicit ambiguities to engage audiences in a conversation about how divided Superman fans and our society have become in the 21st century. Your baggage-informed gut reaction to how he narratively contextualizes these ambiguous characters and events is all that matters to him as a filmmaker, and judging from his approach here, as a human being. If you watch Gunn's film and find a kind, hopeful, and uncynical interpretation of Superman, one whose pursuit of truth and fidelity to goodness is something to aspire to as individuals and nations, then that says something about how you've come to see the world, or at least what you want out of this world. Put another way, you want Superman and the United States to exist. No matter how problematic their origin stories, no matter how hard they keep falling down, what matters is their determination to keep getting back up, brushing themselves off, and fighting for a better tomorrow. Superman and America are a series of choices, after all, not divine fonts of righteousness. On the other hand, if you identify the qualities found in Superman as woke in the pejorative sense, or soft, or insert random emasculating and or insulting adjective as markers of weakness in alleged heroes and nations that should want to be respected by force, then that says something about you too. Put another way, you're a fascist asshole, or you're a fascist asshole. I mean, either way works. Unfortunately, it turns out that a lot of us are fascists these days. We're back to art being a mirror. I also talk about often here at 5 a.m. Story Talk, a mirror doesn't just show you a reflection. It can bring into focus what you've otherwise tried to avoid seeing, causing you to reflect on the truth of where you've ended up as a person. Gunn didn't just craft a lighter, brighter Superman film to entertain us, or a right the ship at Warner Brothers, or as some of those so-called Snyder Bros think, to troll them. He made one to challenge, disturb, and outright provoke its audience, both fascism-friendly cynics and those beaten down and broken by the past decade of fascism creep, into asking themselves some hard questions about their part in society's breakdown and what they want from the future. That's the real message Gunn coded into Pa Kent's "It's time to get back into the fight" low point talk. The filmmaker is speaking directly to his audience, both those whose faith is flagging and those who have made mistakes about who to believe in but are looking for a redemption arc. How we interpret the world, including heroes, how we choose to see the right and wrong right in front of our eyes, how we choose to act on it, says more about who we are than whether we can write a 50-page PhD on the subject. But it's not up to Gunn to tell you what's right or wrong himself, of course. It wouldn't work even if he did. That's why he built all the aforementioned ambiguities into Superman. Great art, like our world in crisis, requires audience participation. Or as Pa Kent tells his beaten down and confused boy, your choices, your actions. That's what makes you who you are. Okay, yeah, but maybe, just maybe, I'm completely wrong about my interpretation of Superman. Maybe James Gunn is a glorified hack, and I've imbued more meaning into his latest comic book cash-in than it remotely deserves. Maybe Zack Snyder's decidedly darker take on the character is the real Superman, or at least the Superman this world deserves. Really, who can say anymore as I turn on the TV and scream in horror? But at the end of the day, I do know this to be true. I prefer what my understanding of Gunn's message says about me, and I hope I'm not alone. For all of you out there, that was again Cole Haddon on Medium. The link for the article is in the description below, and you can find it there. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed it. I just found it intriguing. Again, you know, it's a discussion point. Every time I read an article, I'm not telling you what to think. I'm not even saying that by sharing these articles, I'm condoning what's in them. I just find them interesting, and as well, they're the beginning of a conversation, not the end of a conversation, which is kind of the whole point of this channel. So let's jump in and see. I know that there's been some super chats coming in, so before I get to viewer letters, let's see what you guys are thinking about. Let's see, I gotta see where I'm at. Star Trek Phase 2 or Star Trek the Motion Picture, which would you have chosen to be developed and why? Well, it's interesting. For those of you who are Star Trek fans, the Roddenberry Archives dropped 4 videos yesterday that are essential viewing. They're, as a matter of fact, they were shot by a guy that I work with on the Star Trek Experience, Dave DeVos, and they were directed and edited by Roger Lay Jr., who, and the Akutas worked on them. My friend Darren Doctorman's in them. And there's a whole half-hour piece that's really interesting on Star Trek Phase 2, which was the TV series that was going to be made in 1977, that they pulled the plug on. Sets were built, casting was going on, 13 scripts were written. They pulled the plug after Star Wars was successful to turn it into a movie. There's also a video on Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens, who wrote 10 novels with William Shatner, 10 Star Trek novels with William Shatner, the Shatnerverse, so to speak. There's a piece on that. There's a great piece on Nicholas Meyer talking about working on Star Trek, and there's an interview with Walter Koenig, and it's about 2 hours total, and they're wonderful documentaries, and they're available right now on YouTube. So the question says, Phase 2 or Star Trek the Motion Picture? I would love to have seen the Phase 2 TV series. And as a matter of fact, you can kind of get a taste because 2 of the scripts written for Phase 2 were later repurposed in Next Generation. One was The Child, an episode which opened the 2nd season of TNG because of the writer's strike, and a 4th season episode called Devil's Due. Those were both written originally for Phase 2, and they repurposed those for Next Generation. But I would have especially liked to have seen an episode called Katoomba that was actually made by James Cawley's group over at Star Trek, Phase 2 and New Voyages as a fan film. But, I mean, obviously, you can't say the development of Phase 2, the pilot scripts for Phase 2, the pilot 2-hour opener was called In Thy Image by Alan Dean Foster, and that was repurposed into the Star Trek the Motion Picture script. So you could honestly say that Star Trek Phase 2 was turned into Star Trek the Motion Picture. I think I would have preferred, I would have loved to have seen the Phase 2 series. I really, especially at that time. I think it would have been amazing to see that Phase 2 series because we would have gotten more with Kirk in command of the Enterprise. And I think some of the writing would have been fantastic, and it would have been happening at a time when there was a lot of exciting science fiction, fantasy, and horror happening. So we probably would have had a great series that was going to run for at least 5 years. You know, if it got on the air in 77, we would have had it till 82. And that doesn't mean we wouldn't have got Next Generation. So it would have been a very interesting thing. But my real wish is that Robert Wise had 6 months to continue to work on Star Trek the Motion Picture. It was locked into its December 7th, 1979 release date, which was unfortunate. I wish they could have had 6 months or a year. But if it had opened 6 months later, it would have opened in June in the shadow of The Empire Strikes Back. I'm happy that we finally have the director's edition in 4K, so that's exciting. Bajaro says, hell no, Sinners and hopefully Weapons. Originality. I don't know what hell no means, but I really love Sinners, and I can't wait to see Weapons. JT Hiskey says, I hope you're having a great week. Danny Elfman is coming to our Comic-Con next month. I cannot wait. I wanted to tell you about it. Oh, man. I love Danny Elfman. You know, I love his score for Wanted. The Little Things, the song, the opening theme song, sounds like a really cool Oingo Boingo tune, but I'm a huge fan. The Mattuine says, other than Bond and Mission Impossible, can we even name another film franchise that's remained above average for 20 years? Well, that's a good one. Planet of the Apes. Planet of the Apes. I mean, I know you could say that Rise, what's it been, like 20 years since Rise of the Planet of the Apes came out? Is it that long? But the Planet of the Apes franchise now has, well, if you include the Tim Burton remake, that makes it 10, right? There's been 10 Apes movies. It ain't it ain't easy, folks. Kids who saw Iron Man 1 now have their own kids. It's true. You're absolutely right. If you slapped, the real Thomas Logan says, if you slapped the Nickelodeon logo on Superman 25, the way the movie was made or written would suddenly make sense because Superman 25 is a kid's movie. Well, I would argue, shouldn't it be? Shouldn't Superman be a 4-quadrant movie? I mean, why not? That you're making a value judgment based on what you think a Superman movie should be. But I think a Superman movie should be maybe a 4-quadrant film, maybe. Tell him, Jim. Tell him, Jim. Tell him, Jim. Nice Miri reference there. Happy birthday, R&B, says Tell him, Jim. Well, thank you for sending in that tip. By the way, tip is different from Super Chats. If you want to send in a tip, It is in the link in the description, along with also you can go get True Noir. The link is in the description, and the article I read is in the description. So there you go. Again, great comments. I look forward to, please chime on in if you want. And I've got letters to read. Let's see. I'm going to start with, this is a pretty great letter. Bob Coleman, this is a good letter, asks a good question. I just became a member of your channel, and I wasn't able to join the member chat today. This was just back on Saturday, as my Wi-Fi was giving me grief, but I look forward to joining next time. We look forward to seeing you, Bob. Question. It seems there is a lot of love for Grindhouse films, those from the original era of the 1970s, 80s, and neo or pseudo Grindhouse films, new ones done in a Grindhouse style, i.e. Tarantino flicks. I find it interesting that there's a following for these films, especially from young people who were not even around during the OG era of Grindhouse cinema. Are there any Grindhouse films, old and new, that hold a special place in your heart? And what is your perspective on Grindhouse cinema in general? Rock on, Robert. You demand. Well, that's actually a great question, Bob. What is a grind? See, here's the thing. I think Grindhouse refers not just to the movies themselves, but where you saw them. And I think of, when I hear Grindhouse, I actually add a word to it, which is soda stick. A soda stick Grindhouse theater. Now, to me, what a Grindhouse movie is a B movie. It's not a studio release. It's a smaller, usually, and when I say B movie, I don't mean like it's a bad movie. It's just not a top-tier studio release. And many of the movies that I grew up going to see in the theater were what I would call Grindhouse movies. And like people would say, kung fu movies, blaxploitation movies, horror movies, action-adventure films. These were movies that would play, a Grindhouse theater would be 42nd Street, or now in downtown LA, the grand movie houses of the 30s and 40s became Grindhouse theaters because, they were cheap and they were servicing a relatively sleazy clientele that wanted to see sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Not as sleazy as, say, a porn theater, but those were the theaters that would show you these things, and frequently they weren't necessarily cleaned up after every show. People would spill. You'd hear soda, cups of Coke spilled, so the floors would be sticky with Coca-Cola, and sugar drinks. So your feet, like, they sucked up, and it was hard to move your feet up. But to me, Grindhouse movies were some of my favorite movies growing up. I mean, I would have to say that, like, Shaft could have been a Grindhouse movie, or you could go even like foreign exploitation movies. They Call Her One Eye, which is what Daryl Hannah's character was inspired by. Or if you saw the original Swedish uncut version, it's just called Thriller, A Cruel Picture. A true Grindhouse classic. Rape revenge film that the original version has hardcore pornography cut into it. The American version was edited, but you can, of course, now get the 4K version of They Call Her One Eye. Maybe not Shaft was a Grindhouse movie, but certainly the Slaughter movies are. Black Caesar, the early Pam Grier stuff, Coffee, and there were a lot of martial arts movies that you would consider, like Sonny Chiba's movies, Street Fighter, Return of the Street Fighter and Sister Street Fighter. All of these kinds of movies they were made for usually a very low budget, and they were not made by a studio. They didn't have the gloss of a studio. A lot of them were independently made movies, regionally released, regionally made films. I mean, I would say that George Romero, as much as I love George Romero and his films have had critical acclaim over the years, I would definitely say that Night of the Living Dead, The Crazies, My Beloved Dawn of the Dead, Martin, those are total Grindhouse movies. I saw Dawn of the Dead. It was a little bit more upscale in a very nice theater. The UA-70, which was adjacent to the UA-150, where I saw Star Wars and Alien. But Dawn of the Dead might be my favorite example of Grindhouse. And there's a lot of movies like my beloved Phantasm. When I first saw Phantasm, where I grew up on Mercer Island, Washington, I'd either go downtown to see movies, but ironically, in downtown Seattle, they didn't really have any Grindhouse theaters. My favorite Grindhouse theater was the Crossroads Cinema in Bellevue, because you could go see a studio movie. They never quite booked major studio movies in there. The biggest you could get, like, I snuck into Dressed to Kill at the Crossroads Theater, but that was the theater that would also play the American cutdown of Fulci's The Beyond, which was released in America's Seven Doors of Death. But you could go there and see Italian giallo movies right next to a major release. And sometimes they had, movies like Terminator or something would play. But Terminator was kind of a Grindhouse movie too. But in the 80s, I mean, I equate Grindhouse theaters to inner city, more like grand movie houses that fell into disrepair, or the theater districts became sleazy, inner city sleaze, the way New York could do it. In Seattle, let's face it, we didn't really have any of that. But so I have great affection for those movies. On Let's Get Physical Media, Dieter Bastian and we buy a lot of Grindhouse, what are called Grindhouse titles. And I think the reason they're being sort of rediscovered and kids are finding them again is because they are punk rock. They do have extreme violence. They have a lot of sex in them, but sex in a way that hasn't been seen. I mean, nowadays we all have hardcore pornography at the tips of our fingers, but I think a lot of that is off-putting. But seeing how many boobs graced our screens in Grindhouse cinema, it's just very different. And there was a lot of companies like Crown International Pictures that made a lot of teen flicks where it was dudes cruising and looking for chicks, like Hollywood Boulevard or Van Nuys Boulevard, or like Hollywood Nights, or something like that. Or a great Grindhouse movie that I love, Massacre at Central High, which is a great movie. If you've never seen Massacre at Central High, new kid comes to a school that's run by like these rich preppy assholes, and he decides to start murdering them. It's awesome. And growing up with those movies on cable, I remember watching an action movie that I haven't seen since, but it was called Seven. It had nothing to do with the David Fincher movie, but it was like an action movie. All I remember is like a group of 7 mercenaries going to the woods, or going to some country to, I don't know, take down a bad guy. I don't even remember. I saw it once, like late night. But I would say that like Cannon Films was a total Grindhouse company, making in the 80s, making Chuck Norris movies like Invasion USA, certainly their ninja movies, American Ninja with Steve James and Michael Dudikoff, Cannon Films specialized in making 80s Grindhouse cinema. And then there was some great Grindhouse movies like I love James Glickenhaus movies. They were more respectable, like The Exterminator or Ken Wall and The Soldier. And then he went upscale, he made McBain with Christopher Walken that they shot in South Africa and used like the military there. It's insane. I took a date to McBain at the National Theater in Westwood. I took a date to a movie called The Boys Next Door with Maxwell Caulfield and Charlie Sheen. Let me tell you, don't ever do that. Don't ever take a date and show her that movie. Just trust your Uncle Bob here. Don't do it. It will not end well for you. So, I think there's an honesty about Grindhouse. I think there's something about it that you look at it now, and it was a time where people in the Vietnam era in the 70s, they were making unrepentant movies. There's nothing like that anymore. I think our youth, despite the fact that we live in a porn-drenched, cynical culture, I think our youth has been infantilized. And I think part of that is because we don't have Grindhouse cinema anymore. We don't have real rock and roll. We don't have punk rock. It's sad. It's a bummer. We deserve better. Let's see. Oh, this is interesting. Hang on. Let me see if I can get the picture that goes along with this. I was sent a piece of art by a viewer. So that's cool. Hang on. I'll get it. But this comes from Adita Sohani. That's Adita Sohani. I believe it's Adita Sohani, and I'll try and get the picture, but I forgot to get this beforehand, so sometimes I get the spinning pinwheel of death. Longtime listener Second-time letter writer. Previously, I had sent one reporting after the Three Colors trilogy, but forgot to put Robservations in the title. Oh, I'm sorry. I am hugely anticipating Guillermo del Toro's upcoming Frankenstein film, and I'm very intrigued by the fact that Guillermo del Toro has said it's not a horror film, but a gothic sci-fi film. I would like to hear your thoughts about Guillermo del Toro's films and his love of fantasy, science fiction, and romance, and your favorite one of his. Mine is Crimson Peak, followed closely by Pacific Rim, and attached is a sketch poster I made in anticipation. Take care and keep up your great work. Let me see if I can find this picture that you sent me. I'm a big fan of Guillermo del Toro. The first time I ever saw one of his movies was Kronos, which I believe was his first feature, and I loved it. I love the kind of horror fairy tale that it was. Again, he unflinchingly looks at things. Now here is the picture. Here's the artwork that he did. I really like this. This looks vaguely like something that like 20s European art. So this is the piece of art that Aditya Sohani did. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of Guillermo del Toro, and I think his sensibility is fairly Baroque. Like, he doesn't necessarily give you straightforward Hollywood narratives. I've really loved everything that he's done for the most part. Blade 2, obviously, again, his vision of Nomak and how that movie takes place in some weird sort of European dystopia, kind of. Pacific Rim is probably my favorite Guillermo del Toro movie because he and I have a love for Japanese science fiction. When I watched that movie, I couldn't believe it even existed, that he got a studio to give him the money to make that movie. I lost my shit when I saw it. He was actually at the screening. I saw it 4 months before it was open. We went and saw it at the Burbank 16, and Derek Hughes and some other friends of mine went, and it was a great screening. And he was in the lobby afterwards. I think it was the first time because it was a legendary picture. Thomas Tull and John Jashney were there to gauge the crowd response. They used to run Legendary; they don't anymore. But it was a really fun time, and I love that film. But Pan's Labyrinth, The Devil's Backbone, I really like all of those movies, and they're uniquely him. No one could make them the way he could. And I pretty much like all of his movies. I have to say though, even though I own the 4K, I'm not as much of a fan of Crimson Peak as you are, and I own it. I should go back and look at it again, give it another shot, because other people have told me that they loved it, and it was not my favorite. So, yeah. This one comes from Howard Johnston. Howard Johnston writes this and says, "Dear Rob, as a longtime lurker, a viewer of your shows for many, many years, I've finally become an imagination connoisseur member of your channel." Well, thank you. That makes me feel like perhaps I have the right to contact you now about a few issues that I'm interested to know your views about. We're broadly of the same generation. I'm a British boomer. I was born in 1960 and was a Star Trek fan since 1969 when it debuted in the UK. Like you, I value TOS above all others, and Star Trek the Motion Picture is my favorite movie. Like you, I loathe modern Star Trek. Virtually everything you've ever said about New Trek replicates my views about this shallow mimicry imposter garbage. I love you already. But this email's not about that. Why not? I could wax lyrical about Star Trek for paragraphs and page upon volume, but I think we've both said everything that needs to be said for the present about modern Star Trek. I don't know, I bet I could find another stream in me. We've actually exchanged views on Twitter about some of these things. I appear there as Sparehead3, so enough about Trek, probably. I would like to suggest a couple of other topics you might like to discuss on future shows. Back in the late 1960s and early 70s, I did like other sci-fi TV shows besides Trek. An early example was Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. That seemed to me to have a similar blueprint to Trek, a vessel and crew exploring and encountering menace, etc. It prepared me to move on to Trek when that arrived. Watching now, it doesn't stand up at all. It's silly, as many Irwin Allen shows are, and most episodes make little sense. It often makes me cringe as a guy in my 60s, and yet I loved it as a kid back in the actual 60s. Plus, the Sea View, the submarine in Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, is one of the great one of the great, most beautiful sci-fi vehicles of all time, with its manta ray head, its manta ray flying sub. It's just a badass sub. And remember, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea did begin as a theatrical motion picture first. It often makes you cringe, and yet I loved it as a kid back in the 60s. Ditto the time tunnel, which is even worse. Yeah, but again, the time tunnel itself was cool, and it was cool seeing two like handsome dudes go back in time and try and stop bad things from happening. Lost in Space, which at least has some hilarity, and Land of the Giants, which was the best of the lot, but lost its way very quickly. Again, though, another cool space vehicle in the Spindrift. I even have a Spindrift t-shirt. But I watched all the Irwin Allen shows, and I didn't love them nearly as much as Star Trek, and even then I recognized they were silly. So it's not surprising that Star Trek steward Akiva Goldsman now is going to be in charge of the new Irwin Allen universe, because God love him, that's where he belongs. But around the early 1970s, I think I loved Star Trek and Land of the Giants equally, and both had great premises. But now I think Allen's Land of the Giants has not stood the test of time remotely as well as Roddenberry's great program. However, there was one show from that period that I love as much now as I did when I first saw it. And that brings me to my first topic, Quinn Martin Productions' The Invaders. I don't know if you've ever discussed the show. The only reason I haven't is, to tell you the truth, I have not seen every episode of The Invaders. I need to rectify that. I built, when I was in elementary school, a model. Aurora Models made a great model of the spaceship from The Invaders that even had an interior in it. And I built that model before I'd even seen the show. But then I got to see the show later, and I loved it. I love what I've seen. But what I need to do is buy the show. Can you buy the show? I've never looked into it. Buy the show on disc and watch all the episodes. I appreciate that not everybody likes the same shows with anything like the same passion, but would it make a good topic? I think so. I think it still stands up. At its best, Larry Cohen, It's Alive Larry Cohen, The Stuff Larry Cohen, Black Caesar Larry Cohen, God Told Me To Larry Cohen. I love Larry Cohen. I used to sit with him at the Saturn Awards every year. But yeah, Larry Cohen's premise was absolutely brilliant. Alien invaders who walk amongst us in human form with very little obvious to give away their true identity, and when they die, they incinerate and disappear. Great-looking flying saucers that actually looked quite scary to me as a kid. Totally. Dark, moody, atmospheric, spooky music by Dominic Frontieri. Great score, by the way. David Vincent, played by Roy Thinnis, the lone hero, fighting a lonely war, disbelieved by most people he encounters. It was brilliant. To be fair, a similar format to Quinn Martin Productions' The Fugitive, which it was very much like The Fugitive, which preceded it, but this time in a sci-fi setting. It was quite dramatic and chilling at its best. For me, The Invaders is my next favorite 1960s show after Star Trek, the original series. In my mind, it just didn't air where I lived. And it wasn't on Channel 11. Otherwise, I would have watched it. Does it hold any merit for you? I would love to see the show rebooted, or rather continued. I think the premise is still a strong one. By the way, the 1995 miniseries Revival was awful, despite the inclusion of Roy Thinnis in a cameo, Scott Bakula, and even John Boy Walton Richard Thomas as the leads. It bore little similarity to the original show. However, with modern production technology and suitably suspenseful stories, A Return of the Invaders could work well. I agree. My second topic jumps genres to American comic book superheroes. I know this is something you are also passionate about, but do you share my particular love of DC's The Spectre? I love The Spectre, but The Spectre has been portrayed very differently. I like sort of the awe-inspiring, godlike Spectre. Recent superhero movies have left me largely bored, to be honest. I haven't seen Gunn Superman yet, nor Fantastic Four First Steps. Much of the most recent DC and Marvel releases have been formulaic product. I'm sick of sequels. I don't need endless Spider-Man or Avengers movies. I think you'd love Avengers. And you know what? You should really watch the whole Infinity Saga. I'm just saying. I fail to see why they can't create some movies about heroes that have thus far been ignored, and the greatest omission to me is surely the Spectre. He's actually one of the oldest of all DC superheroes and one of the most intriguing. I can see a cinematic presentation that creates a dark, menacing, dramatic movie. A film that would surely cross over to wider audiences with its quasi-religious themes and personal redemption. Jim Corrigan's story is a timeless classic. There are other superheroes I'd like to see upon the big screen, like Dr. Fate and Martian Manhunter, but the Spectre is my most longed for. I'm with you, and I think, you know what? With James Gunn in charge of the DC universe now, I wouldn't be surprised if we got a Spectre, because it could be like, in a way, it could make DC's first great biblical epic, but not biblical, if you wanted to go that way. In closing, I will briefly return to modern Star Trek and make a final point about both Star Trek Discovery and Starfleet Academy. Given that the latter part of the first show and the entirety of the forthcoming one are set in the 32nd century, why is the environment we find ourselves in so familiar? Well, because they're all unimaginative hacks. Look at the changes in our world, societies, and outlook since 1066. A millennium is a long period in the history of any civilization, but not in new Star Trek. Nearly a millennium after TOS and TNG, etc., we still have Starfleet, we still have the Federation. Surely a more viable representation in that period would be a totally different universe with different species, empires, and so on. What is left of the Federation and Starfleet, if indeed any of those things survive, would be far different, in my view. Future Star Trek should be about exploring something totally different than what we're familiar with. But for that, we would need great sci-fi writers and inspired showrunners, and even with the changes brought about by Paramount and the Skydance merger, I fear we are unlikely to see it. And that is the greatest shame of all. Thanks for all you do with Robservations. Thanks for reading this. Please keep bashing New Trek, and live long and prosper. Regards, Howard S.M. Johnson. Well, Howard, you and I park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay, for sure. Look, I think the idea of doing a Starfleet Academy series set in the 32nd century makes no sense. And especially when you look at the show and they're talking about duty, honor. I mean, it is an utter failure. I haven't seen it. I don't like to bash things I haven't seen. But you can tell they wanted to do this for a long time. Harv Bennett wanted to do it in a long time, but it's to do this in the 32nd century is ridiculous, because the people writing it are gonna make it feel like it's of today, which is irksome in the extreme, because you're talking about a show that's continuity set 1,000 years in Star Trek's future. Well, not quite 1,000 years, but 1,000 years almost. And like you said, we would be unrecognizable. At least I hope we would be. Human beings are going to be unrecognizable at the end of the 21st century. Assuming we're going to be here, we are going to be half cybernetic. We are going to interact with machines. We are probably going to have digital duplicates of ourselves, or artificial intelligence that are walking around either in duplicate bodies. We're going to have multiple copies of ourselves doing our work for us. I mean, we'll be interfaced. It's going to be insane. So modern Star Trek, when they decided to leap into 1,000 years in the future, and I can't stress this enough, back in 2005, when I had a conversation over dinner with Chris McQuarrie and Bryan Singer after Enterprise had went off the air, we talked about doing a Star Trek show. And I said to them, I'll go get a treatment done. And I had an idea set 1,000 years in the future, and I pitched it to a friend of mine that I was working with at the time, Jeff Thorne, who hopefully we're going to be seeing a comic from him called The Red Line soon, which we published an issue of a long time ago, but it was a really great idea, and I think even now it's an even better idea, especially in the wake of the Altadena fires. I don't know what Jeff's going to do with it, but I wish him the best, and I hope he does. But Jeff wrote out, he took some of my vague ideas and put them into a Bible and a pitch deck for a show called Star Trek Federation. And it's kind of what you just said. It's 1,000 years in the future, in the 30th century. But the Federation had changed. The actual United Federation of Planets had just gotten old, like an empire had gotten old, and the Vulcans had reunified with the Romulans. There's a lot of ideas in that pitch deck that wound up in Star Trek Discovery. Now, I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but the people that worked on Discovery, and they ripped off David Mack's Section 31 novel, Control. So bad. They ripped off Ursula K. Le Guin's Those Who Walk Away from Umlaus. Bunch of thieves over there. And they stole all their characters and all their concepts from Star Trek, the original series. So I wouldn't put it past them. But anyway, yeah, interesting letter. I want to thank you for that. And I liked hearing from you. And now you've made me, I've got to go finally rectify a hole in my life, the invaders. This letter, first of all, before I jump into another letter, let me see if any of you have, a lot of people have been firing in letters and things. So let me get back to where that was. Emmanuel Garcia became a subscriber to the channel. Thank you very much. Sci-fi Extremist says, what movies do you define the term cult classic? You mean what I think you're asking me is, how do I define a cult classic? Okay. I think it's a pretty easy term in terms of what I believe it is. In my mind, a cult classic is what it says. A cult has arisen around a certain fairly obscure movie. And for instance, like, there's a lot of cult classics that like Rocky Horror Picture Show to me is the ultimate cult movie. It developed literally a cult around it that would go see it every Friday and Saturday night at midnight, and to the point where they created their own there's a shadow cast that performs in front of you, and then somebody created I don't even know where it came from. I'd love to figure it out, but this has been going on since 1975, where there's people go and they participate. You put newspapers over your head, you fire squirt guns and make it rain on those people. Who created that? I don't know. But a cult classic is a movie that is a fairly obscure film that develops a rabid fan base. And usually, for the most part, most cult classics have some kind of value. There's something within them that appeals to a certain group of people that aren't necessarily the mainstream. I think that there's a lot of horror movies that are cult classics. The Beyond among horror circles is considered a significant Italian horror film. Lucio Fulci's The Beyond. I guess I would call that a cult movie, although in horror circles, it's not that obscure. Everyone knows it. It's considered a classic of the genre. In America, not so much. The same, I think, would go of a lot of Italian horror films. Gates of Hell, Zombie 2, House by the Cemetery, Lamberto Bava's Demons. That's what a cult movie is. Like, I don't think the Terminator became mainstream. It could have been a cult movie if people didn't remember it, but it became mainstream, became very successful. It was like a big box office winner back in '84. But, low budget movies can but I think that not every low budget movie is a cult classic. One of my favorite cult films from Britain is kind of a highbrow movie, and that's With Nail and I, that stars Richard E. Grant and Paul McGann. It's a comedy that not a lot of Americans get. And I'm not putting anybody down. I'm just saying I love With Nail and I, and With Nail, like with a nail, it's just With Nail. With Nail is the name of a person. We've gone on vacation by mistake. Bring me your finest ales. I love With Nail and I. So if you haven't ever seen With Nail and I, give it a whirl. Criterion just put it out in 4K. If you haven't, wait, I think I have it like right here. Yeah, I haven't even opened it yet. Here's the 4K of With Nail and I. It's got a Ralph Steadman cover. People don't even know these days who Ralph Steadman was, which is too bad. But if you do, it's got a Ralph Steadman cover that he drew. Very Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Very Hunter S. Thompson. It kind of feels like a movie Hunter S. Thompson would have written. But I think that's what a cult movie is. A cult movie is a non-mainstream film that has a rabidly passionate audience, and they love it. But you can't set out here's a Burnett axiom, along with never put your universe before your characters and story. That's one of them. But another one is that you can never set out to make a cult movie, just like you can't set out to make a camp classic. That happens organically around what you've made. If you set out to make a cult movie, or you set out, Liquid Sky is a cult movie. Definite. I don't know why Liquid Sky's come back into the conversation all of a sudden. Well, it was, we had the dinner plate size UFO, the flying saucer from Liquid Sky and Starship Smackdown 2 weeks ago at Comic-Con, so I'm thinking about Liquid Sky. Liquid Sky was one of my favorite early 80s cult classics. If you haven't seen Liquid Sky, watch the trailer. Vinegar Syndrome put out a great Blu-ray of it. It's terrific. If you haven't seen it, I mean, people now would watch it and go, what? What? One of the things about cult classics is that younger modern audiences, a lot of them can't get past certain elements of the production of cult classics, and they can't hang with them at all. Learning how to watch a cult classic is part of it, you know. John Waters movies, cult classics. David Lynch, I mean, Eraserhead. The rest of his movies are... It's funny because David Lynch is a guy that made a cult classic like Eraserhead, and then he went mainstream by making Elephant Man, and then his later movies he became a cult hero again with Mulholland. I mean, he went and made some... Elephant Man was a big mainstream movie, but then he went back to, you know, Blue Velvet and Mulholland Drive. Blue Velvet, I think Blue Velvet is a cult movie, but it skirts the line to mainstream, but it's definitely a cult movie too. Hell, Blade Runner's a cult movie in a way. It didn't have any mainstream success, so it's a good question. I like. What are some of your favorite cult movies out there? What do you like? Put them in the. Go down there and put them in the chat. B.A. Gaffex says, I heard from Nerdrotic today that Guillermo del Toro was fired from The Hobbit and he was difficult to work with. Do you have any insight into that? Well, I worked on the behind the scenes of Lord of the Rings, but I didn't work on The Hobbit. I mean, I don't know if he was fired. I would assume he's very difficult to work with because the man's a visionary. And so is Peter Jackson. And when he agreed to do The Hobbit, he probably wanted, you know, when Philip and Fran and Peter were doing Lord of the Rings, they had their own way of doing things, and Guillermo came down and probably was taking too long, and maybe it wasn't such a good fit. I think Peter Jackson and Guillermo del Toro are probably still great friends. And I don't necessarily know if he was fired, if he could do it. I don't know. I really don't know what happened. Larry Quartowitz says, have I seen Eddington? He asked if I've seen Eddington. I thought it was terrifying and brilliant. I can't wait to see it. I just haven't got to it yet. I felt like I was on acid when I exited the theater. I saw it at 11 a.m. on a weekday. Very disturbing, but I'm happy I saw it. I can't wait to see it. You know, Ari Aster, I'll go see any of his movies. Darth Plato says, happy birthday, Rob. Have you seen Chief of War yet? Looks like Shaka Zulu in Hawaii. It does look like Shaka Zulu. I thought that too. I watched a trailer for it today. I almost, you know what? Okay. This afternoon, I came home from the John Campea show. I had some work to do, and it's like kind of this before I go do shows at night here, like between like 4 and 7 is like this nether region where I either read books or I build something or I'm working on a project or whatever. And I sat down, and you know what I ended up doing? I ended up watching the first episode of the first season of For All Mankind, Red Moon. After talking with Ron Moore, and I just had For All Mankind on the brain, and I love that show. And I got to tell you, at the end of that episode, again, I was like totally in tears. I've watched that episode like 8 times, and this was like the 9th, and by the end of it, I was completely involuntarily crying. Totally crying, watching Red Moon. You know, when the Eagle, America's beaten to the moon by the Soviets, but we go up 2.5 weeks later and we land, and they lose contact with the Eagle, and you think the American astronauts are dead, and it turns out they just crashed, but they survive. And I'm like, I was bawling. What does that say about me? I'm a sap. I am a sap. So I didn't watch Chief of War, but I almost got to it. It was right there staring me in the face. JT Hiskey says, I got to meet Paris Jackson a few weeks ago, Michael Jackson's only daughter. How do you feel about Nepo children in general in the industry? It's a good question, but why is it that people, I mean, kids going into the family business is like the most obvious thing in the world. Look at Uma Thurman and Homeboy's daughter, who's in Stranger Things. She's great. It makes Nepo babies, like, since following your parents' footsteps into a business is like the most American thing ever. I think this whole idea, what's really interesting? Here's a truism. You still have to be talented. If you want to make it in the entertainment business, it doesn't matter who your parents are. You have to be talented. If you want to direct movies, if you want to be an actor, anything that requires real talent, just knowing who might get you one shot or one bite at the apple, it ain't going to keep you there. So I don't understand why Nepo babies are a thing. It's like anywhere else. Connections in any business, in anywhere you are in the world. It's just Hollywood is a high-profile business. The rock and roll is a high-profile business, so people think that, there's Nepo babies. Like, they don't... No. Nobody gets to stay in any entertainment industry complex, whatever, in music or movies or television if you suck. So it doesn't matter who your parents are. If you don't bring the noise and you don't bring the... Ethan Hawke. Maya Hawke. That's her name, Maya Hawke. Maya Hawke is not going to get work because she's Ethan Hawke and Uma Thurman's daughter. Just like... why am I drawing a blank? Dakota Johnson, Don Johnson and Melanie Griffith's daughter, is not going to get work if she wasn't good. And a lot of people would say maybe they don't love her as an actress. I fell in love with her when she was in Social Network, and she has a small role, but I thought she was so adorable and sexy. And she's like, "You're Sean Parker? I slept with Sean Parker." I thought that she was great in that. I've liked her in certain things she's been in, and she's a great nighttime talk show host guest, and she's totes adorbs. But she sticks around because she can actually act. And if she can't act anymore, despite the fact that she was in Madam Web, but even the way she took that, I thought was great. Let's see. I think I've caught up with everybody. Oh, no. Larry Kordowich says, "Happy birthday." Did you hear Thank you. Did you hear they might release Lynch's final screenplay, Unrecorded Night? Apparently, it was an original mystery set in Hollywood, MDLH style, Mulholland Drive, and Lost Highway style. It'd be great. There's another script I'd love to see get released for everybody, which is Ronnie Rocket, another project that he was involved in. Somebody says Boondock Saints. Boondock Saints, that's a total cult movie, I think, even though people love it. That's totally a modern cult movie. Here's another letter. The last letter of the evening. It's from Kevin Seeley. Dear Rob, please feel free to read this letter during the show. This letter is in response to Robservations episode number 1051, your latest discussion on the quality of current Star Trek. Like you, I am disappointed by the quality or lack thereof in current Star Trek, especially Strange New Worlds. The writing is juvenile, lacking in creativity, thoughtfulness, and intelligence. Goddamn right. Season 1 of Strange New Worlds showed promise, despite what the writers have done with the Gorn. However, since then, it has only gone into a cesspool of sci-fi garbage and is perhaps one of the worst-written sci-fi shows of all time. You and I definitely park our shuttlecraft in the same shuttle bay. Unfortunately, what disappoints me more than the quality of current Star Trek is the fact that friends and fellow Trek fans not only enjoy new Trek, but also completely ignore its obvious flaws and poor quality. In the 1980s and 90s, with many of these same friends, I helped found 2 Star Trek fan clubs in the Rochester, New York area. We held monthly meetings, published a newsletter, and held social activities around our favorite fandom. Our newsletters were filled with episode and movie reviews, op-eds of our opinions and thought pieces on what Starfleet and the Federation were. I myself was a regular contributor to our newsletters and enjoyed the intelligent discussions and responses to my articles. All in all, we were an intelligent, critical group who not only shared our love and passion for Star Trek, but were also willing to point out its flaws and quality issues. We often discussed and debated the original TOS episodes and movies, TNG, DS9, Voyager, and Enterprise, and while we enjoyed each of those entries in the Star Trek franchise, we often discussed our likes, dislikes, flawed or standout episodes, writing and directing and acting. However, since the age of Abrams and now Kurtzman's Star Trek, these same friends digest every new Star Trek like a quick afternoon snack without bothering to take the time to taste it. It's a quick meal to suppress their hunger, and they're happy to receive, but it bears little discussion beyond that. One friend has said she enjoys Strange New Worlds for what it is, and I'm okay with that. I'm glad she enjoys it. However, she used to review episodes with an intelligent and critical eye for quality. Now she just enjoys it for what it is, and that saddens me deeply. More and more, I see fans and friends like her accepting new Star Trek for what it is and ignoring, perhaps forgetting, what it was and what it can become. New Star Trek should be improving upon what came before. Instead, it has regressed so far in quality that it insults its audience intelligence. I'm deeply saddened not only to say this, but to see many fellow Star Trek fans willing to accept the current state of Star Trek. I accept their enjoyment of these shows. I, too, have enjoyed a number of bad sci-fi shows, yet I was willing to point out their flaws and hope for better. I'm just deeply disappointed that many Star Trek fans don't want or demand anything better than what we're currently getting. Thank you, Rob, for being a constant voice to the frustrations of those of us who know what Star Trek is, what it should be, and what it can become again. Did I read that letter a second time? Hell yes, I did. So there you go. And that's from Kevin Seeley. So thank you very much, Kevin. I very much appreciate that. So I just want to read that again. I know I read it last night. But anyway, I thought that was an interesting letter. And Carrie Kordowitz says you can find the Ronnie Rocket script online. Yeah, I have a copy of it too. I have a hard copy of it somewhere. I wish they'd publish it in book form with like any artwork and things that were done for it. I think that would be really cool if they would do that. I don't know if they ever would. So let's see. Let's check in on our poll. Has everyone answered the poll? Fantastic Four started out in front, but Superman is at 67%. I like it. So I like that you guys are digging that. I really appreciate that, which is very cool. So great. That's awesome. Let's see if you got any more. I don't think. Nope. I think I'm caught up. Well, folks, I think I'm going to end this chat. I want to hear what you think about Superman and that article. I know it dipped into the political, and some people get angry and triggered, but I'm here to present thought. And my presenting other people's thoughts is not necessarily me condoning those thoughts. I just find them interesting. I will never tell you what you should think on this show unless we're going to talk Star Trek. And then, of course, I'll tell you exactly what to think. But for the most part, I'm presenting ideas that are to be discussed and ruminated over, and you might hate them, you might like them. They're just things, for me, it's like a stream of consciousness. I'll come across an article and go, that's interesting. I'm going to share it just to see what people might think. I don't totally agree with Cole Haddon all the time, but like I said, and I'm not here, he didn't know. Like, I didn't ask for permission to read the article, but I always try and give credit where credit is due, and I'll say, hey, I really do love Psalms for the End of the World, Cole Haddon's book. If you liked his article on Superman, I would suggest seeking this book out because it's definitely worth a read. It's really interesting, and more than that, it's really entertaining. And also, my guest, if you tuned in the other night, Alvaro's book, Equimedian. Equimedian is, if you've read 70s sci-fi, I keep going to like Samuel R. Delaney's Dahlgren, but it's really nothing like this book. But anyway, this is an ode to 70s science fiction, literary science fiction. I would suggest getting that book too. It's definitely worth a read. And he was a great guest if you watched the other night's Sunday night show. I thought it was great. So anyway, everybody, I'm going to take my leave of you. And remember, I want to thank my moderating staff for being here and taking the time to moderate. Darth Plato. I don't know if Tom Jr. Jackson is still I'm going to end the poll. The poll is ended. So I want to thank you all of you guys too for generously supporting this chat or this channel via super chats and tips. We had a great member call the other day. It was really epic. It was great to see some new people, and we try and have member calls every other week on Saturdays beginning at 11 a.m. Pacific. And sometimes they go a couple hours, sometimes they'll go 5 hours, and we just hang out and chat. And I love seeing new people and talking to new people. So, yeah, Thomas Logan said it was an awful article. Yeah, but why? Why do you think it's an awful article? I mean, share your thoughts, share your views. You just don't like the movie. Tell us why. I thought it was an interesting article. So that's why I shared it. So I want to hear from you. If you hate it, if you like it, tell me down below. I don't know if you're all as excited about seeing Weapons as I am, but I'm really excited about seeing Weapons. Can't wait. 2 more sleeps till Weapons. And on that note, be seeing you. If you're a Prisoner fan, I didn't even do it right, but you could do it sort of that way. I will see you all later. Remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. And with that, have a better night.